Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation of Steel. Julius Little stood at his workshop window, watching the autumn leaves spiral down onto the gravel driveway of his sprawling Montana ranch. At 35, his hands bore the calluses of a man who'd built his empire from the ground up, first as a welder in the oil fields, then as the owner of Little Steel Works, the most successful custom metalworking company in 3 counties. His father, Gregory Little, had taught him 2 fundamental truths. Trust was earned in drops and lost in buckets, and a man's word was his bond until someone broke theirs first. The workshop behind him housed not just industrial equipment, but specialized tools most people would never recognize. Julius had always been methodical, precise, qualities that serve him well in business and would serve him even better in other pursuits. His gray eyes, inherited from his grandfather who'd survived the Korean War, missed nothing. They'd served him well when he caught his first business partner skimming profits 7 years ago. That man, Derek Glass, now worked construction in another state after Julius had systematically dismantled his reputation and financial standing. Julius never forgot, and he certainly never forgave. His cell phone buzzed against the steel workbench. Candace's photo illuminated the screen. His wife of 8 years, currently 6 months pregnant with what she claimed was their second child. Their first, Roman, was 6 years old and possessed an unsettling perceptiveness that often caught adults off guard. The boy had his father's eyes and his grandfather's instincts. "Hey, beautiful," Julius answered, though something in his gut had been churning for months. "Julius, I'm at the clinic for my regular checkup. Dr. Miranda wants to discuss the due date. Seems like the baby might come earlier than expected." Her voice carried that particular strain he'd been noticing lately, the kind that came when someone was managing multiple stories. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Julius ended the call and walked to his gun safe, retrieving a small digital recorder he'd purchased months ago. His instincts, honed by years of dealing with suppliers who tried to shortchange him and employees who thought they could steal from him, had been screaming warnings about his wife's behavior. The late-night phone calls she claimed were from her sister Margaret in Denver. The new clothes and lingerie she said were gifts from friends. The way she'd started showering immediately after coming home from her book club meetings. Julius had learned long ago that when something felt wrong, it usually was. His father had discovered his own wife's affair when Julius was 12, and the lesson had been brutal. Gregory Little had methodically destroyed the man who'd touched his wife and then divorced her without a penny of alimony. "Son," his father had said, "forgiveness is for the weak. Justice is for men like us." As Julius drove toward town, his mind cataloged the inconsistencies in Candace's recent behavior. The supposed book club that met on Tuesday nights. Julius had driven by the location once and found it empty. The new expensive handbag she claimed to have bought with money from selling her grandmother's jewelry that was still in their bedroom safe. The way she'd started arguments over trivial matters, as if she were trying to create distance between them. But what bothered him most was how she'd been treating Roman lately. His son had always been close to his mother, but recently the boy had been watching her with the same analytical intensity Julius recognized in himself. Children, Julius knew, often saw truths that adults worked hard to hide. Dr. Pauline Miranda's office sat in the medical complex downtown, and Julius arrived to find Candace already in the waiting room, scrolling through her phone with nervous energy. She looked up as he entered, and for just a moment, he saw something flicker across her face. Guilt, perhaps, or fear. "The appointment isn't for another 10 minutes, she said, standing to embrace him. Her perfume was different again, something expensive and musky that she'd never worn during their 8 years together. "Wanted to make sure I didn't miss anything important," Julius replied, studying her face. "How's our baby doing?" The way she hesitated before answering told him everything he needed to know. Candace Chung had been many things when he'd married her. Ambitious, beautiful, passionate, but she'd never been a good liar. She'd grown up in San Francisco, the daughter of second-generation immigrants who'd built a successful restaurant chain through brutal work and sacrifice. Her parents, Tommy and Lucia Chung, had taught her about family loyalty and hard work, values that had initially attracted Julius to her. Now, watching her fidget with her wedding ring as she avoided his direct gaze, Julius felt the cold calculation that had served him so well in business begin to crystallize around his heart. If his suspicions were correct, if Candace had chosen to betray the foundation of their family, then she would learn what happened to people who broke faith with Julius Little. The nurse called them back, and as they walked down the hallway, Julius noticed how Candace's phone buzzed constantly in her purse. She'd started keeping it on silent recently, another red flag in his growing collection. In the examination room, Dr. Miranda's demeanor seemed slightly uncomfortable as she discussed the pregnancy's progression. "Everything looks healthy," the doctor said, avoiding eye contact with Julius. "The baby's development is right on track for the due date we discussed." Julius watched the interplay between his wife and the doctor, noting the subtle communication that seemed to flow between them. When Dr. Miranda mentioned scheduling the next appointment, Candace was quick to suggest a time when Julius will be traveling for business, another piece of the puzzle falling into place. Driving home, Julius made his decision. Tomorrow, he would begin the systematic investigation that would either confirm his suspicions or put his mind at ease. He'd learned long ago that knowledge was power, and if his wife was playing games, he intended to know every rule before he started playing back. That evening, as they sat down for dinner with Roman, Julius studied his family with new eyes. His son picked at his food, glancing between his parents with an expression far too mature for a 6-year-old. Candace chattered nervously about her day, filling silences that had never existed before. "Dad," Roman said suddenly, "can I ask you something?" "Always, son. If someone was lying to you, would you want to know? Even if it hurt?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Julius felt Candace stiffen beside him, her fork clattering against her plate. In that moment, he realized his son had already seen what Julius was only beginning to suspect. "Yes," Julius answered carefully. "I'd always want to know the truth. Truth is the foundation everything else is built on. Without it, nothing else matters." Roman nodded solemnly, and Julius caught the boy stealing a glance at his mother that carried the weight of secrets. As Julius tucked his son into bed that night, Roman grabbed his father's hand. "Dad, sometimes grown-ups think kids don't see things. But we do. We see everything." Julius kissed his son's forehead, understanding that whatever was coming, Roman would be his ally, not his burden. The foundation had been laid, and now it was time to discover exactly what was being built upon it. Chapter 2. Cracks in the Foundation. 3 weeks after the clinic visit, Julius had compiled a file that would have impressed a private investigator. He'd installed tracking software on the family's shared computer, positioned motion-activated cameras around his property, and begun documenting every inconsistency in his wife's behavior. What he discovered exceeded even his darkest suspicions. The man's name was Brandon Calhoun, and he owned a high-end construction company that specialized in luxury homes for the wealthy residents moving into Montana from California and New York. At 38, Calhoun had a reputation for charm and ruthlessness that had earned him both success and enemies. He was also married to a woman named Paige, with 2 children of his own. Julius had learned this through a combination of public record searches and casual inquiries to mutual business contacts. What made the betrayal particularly bitter was that Julius had known Calhoun for years. They'd even collaborated on projects where Julius's metalwork complemented Calhoun's construction. The man had been in Julius's home, had shaken his hand, had eaten meals at their table while likely planning to seduce his wife. The evidence was overwhelming. Credit card receipts showing Candace at restaurants and hotels during times she'd claimed to be at book club. Security footage from a boutique hotel downtown showing her entering with Calhoun on multiple occasions. Phone records revealing hundreds of calls and text messages between them, often in the early hours of the morning when Julius was asleep. But the most damning evidence came from the medical records Julius obtained through a contact at the clinic. Dr. Miranda had been covering for Candace, adjusting dates, and providing false information about the pregnancy timeline. The baby wasn't due in 3 months, it was due in 6 weeks, and the conception date made it impossible for Julius to be the father. The child Candace carried belonged to Brandon Calhoun. Julius sat in his workshop at midnight, studying photographs of his wife and her lover entering a cabin that Calhoun owned in the mountains. The images were crystal clear, capturing intimate moments that destroyed any possibility of innocent explanation. His hands, steady as they'd always been when welding intricate metalwork, trembled slightly as he filed the photos with the rest of his evidence. The rage he felt wasn't the hot, explosive anger of a man discovering betrayal in the moment. It was cold, methodical, and patient, the kind of fury that had been inherited through generations of little men who understood that revenge was a dish best served with precision. His phone buzzed with a text from Roman, who was supposedly asleep upstairs. "Dad, I know you're awake. Can I come down?" Julius quickly secured his files and replied, "Come down, son." Roman appeared in the workshop doorway, wearing his dinosaur pajamas, his expression serious beyond his years. "I heard Mom on the phone again. She was crying and telling someone she couldn't keep lying." Julius motioned for his son to sit on the stool beside his workbench. "What else did you hear?" "She said she was scared of what you'd do if you found out. And she said something about the baby not being." Roman paused, struggling with words too adult for his vocabulary. "She said the baby doesn't belong to you." The confirmation from his son's lips should have hurt more, but Julius felt only the cold clarity that came with having his suspicions validated. He wrapped an arm around Roman's shoulders. "Son, what your mother is doing is called betrayal. It's when someone breaks the trust that families are built on. Do you understand?" Roman nodded. "Like when Tommy Thompson at school promised he wouldn't tell anyone my secret, but then he told everyone anyway?" "Exactly like that, but much worse. When adults betray each other, especially in families, it breaks things that can't be fixed. Are you going to divorce her like Grandpa Gregory did with Grandma?" Julius considered his answer carefully. His father's approach had been swift and legal: divorce, custody battles, and financial settlements. But Julius had learned from his father's experience. Gregory Little had let his wife and her lover walk away with their lives intact, merely damaged reputations and empty bank accounts. Julius intended to be more thorough. "Son, your mother made choices that hurt our family. She chose to be with another man while carrying his baby and lying to us about it. Those choices have consequences." "What kind of consequences?" Julius studied his son's face, seeing in it the same cold intelligence that had served the little family for generations. The kind that makes sure she never hurts anyone else the way she hurt us. Roman was quiet for a moment, processing information that most children his age couldn't comprehend. Finally, he looked up at his father with eyes that held no childish innocence. "What do you need me to do?" The question sent a chill through Julius, not because he was horrified by his son's offer, but because he recognized the same ruthless pragmatism that had built their family's success. Roman wasn't asking out of malice. He was asking out of loyalty to the family unit that Candace had chosen to destroy. "For now, just keep watching and listening. Your mother doesn't know that we know, and we need to keep it that way until I'm ready." "Ready for what?" Julius looked around his workshop, taking in the industrial equipment, the specialized tools, and the soundproof walls he'd installed for noise reduction. Everything a man might need to solve problems that couldn't be handled through conventional means. "Ready to make sure justice is served, son. The kind of justice that ensures some mistakes are never repeated." Over the following days, Julius refined his plan with a methodical precision that had made him successful in business. He studied Brandon Calhoun's routines, identifying patterns and vulnerabilities. He researched Paige Calhoun, Brandon's wife, learning about her schedule and habits. He quietly liquidated assets, moving money into accounts that couldn't be easily traced. Most importantly, he began preparing his workshop for activities that went far beyond metalworking. Candace, meanwhile, continued her charade with increasing desperation. Her book club meetings became more frequent, and her lies more elaborate. She started arguments over minor issues, perhaps trying to justify her infidelity by painting Julius as an inattentive husband. She spoke more frequently about how confined she felt on the ranch, how she missed the excitement of city life. Each lie, each manufactured argument, Each moment of false affection added fuel to the cold fire burning in Julius's chest. She'd had countless opportunities to confess, to end the deception, to show some semblance of remorse. Instead, she doubled down on her betrayal, even going so far as to plan a baby shower for what she continued to claim was Julius's child. The breaking point came when Julius discovered that Candace and Brandon had been discussing their future together. Text messages between them revealed plans for Candace to leave Julius after the baby was born, taking Roman and seeking a generous divorce settlement that would fund their new life together. They'd even discussed how to manipulate the custody proceedings to ensure Julius had minimal contact with Roman. That night, Julius sat in his workshop making final preparations. Tomorrow would be the day that Candace went to the hospital for what she thought would be a routine checkup, but what Dr. Miranda had privately confirmed would likely result in early labor. The baby, Brandon's child, will be born into a world where consequences had finally caught up with its parents. Julius checked his supplies one final time. Industrial zip ties, soundproofing materials, chemicals that could dissolve organic matter, and tools that could cut through bone as easily as steel. His grandfather's warm metals watched from their display case, and Julius felt the approval of generations of little men who understood that some betrayals demanded more than legal recourse. Roman appeared in the doorway, somehow knowing that his father needed him without being called. "Is it time, Dad?" Julius looked at his son, truly looked at him, and saw not the child he'd been protecting, but the young man he was becoming. A young man who understood that family loyalty was earned through actions, not blood, and that betrayal carried consequences that legal systems were too weak to enforce. Soon, son. Very soon. Chapter 3, The Awakening. The call came at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. Candace's contractions had started unexpectedly, and Dr. Miranda recommended they come to the hospital immediately. Julius dressed quickly, noting how his wife's face was pale with more than just labor pains. She looked terrified, as if she knew her carefully constructed lies were about to collide with reality. "Should I call my sister?" Candace asked as they drove through the empty streets toward Pine Ridge Hospital. "Which sister?" Julius replied calmly. "Margaret in Denver? Or the sister who doesn't exist that you've been using as an alibi?" The silence that followed was electric. Candace's breathing grew shallower and not from the contractions. "Julius, I don't know what you..." "Candace." His voice cut through her attempted denial like a blade. "We're about to walk into a hospital where you're going to give birth to Brandon Calhoun's child. The child you've been pretending is mine for the past 6 months. The least you can do is stop lying for the next few hours." Her sobs started then, ugly and desperate. But Julius felt no pity. He'd offered her countless opportunities to confess, to end the deception, to show even a shred of remorse. Instead, she continued lying even as her body prepared to deliver the ultimate proof of her betrayal. At the hospital, the medical staff moved with practiced efficiency. Julius played the part of the concerned husband, holding Candace's hand during contractions while she whispered frantic apologies between waves of pain. Dr. Miranda avoided his eyes, clearly aware that her role in the deception had been discovered. "Julius, please," Candace gasped as another contraction peaked. "Let me explain. It wasn't supposed to happen. Brandon and I, we never meant for it to go this far." "How far did you mean for it to go?" Julius asked conversationally. "Just the affair, or were you planning to tell me eventually that you were leaving me for him? Maybe after you'd secured a favorable divorce settlement." Her shocked expression confirmed that he'd accurately reconstructed their plans. During the brief respite between contractions, Julius leaned close to her ear. "I know about the cabin. I know about the hotel meetings. I know about the text messages discussing our future custody arrangements. I know about the plans you and Brandon made to start a new life with my money and my son." "How could you know?" "Because I'm not the trusting fool you apparently thought you married. I'm a little Candace. We don't forgive and we don't forget. We collect evidence and then we act." The labor progressed rapidly, and by dawn, Brandon Calhoun's son had entered the world. The baby's features left no doubt about paternity. He had Brandon's distinctive cleft chin and eye shape. Dr. Miranda's discomfort was palpable as she avoided making any comments about family resemblance. Julius called Roman from the hospital corridor. "Son, it's time for our visit. Bring the bag we prepared. Is Mom sleeping? She will be soon." The doctors gave her medication for the pain. An hour later, Roman arrived at the hospital carrying a small overnight bag. His expression was solemn as they walked toward Candace's room. Through the window, they could see her sleeping peacefully, the baby in a bassinet beside her bed. "She looks so tired," Roman observed. "Lying takes a lot of energy," Julius replied, "especially when you're lying to people who love you." As they entered the room, Roman moved with unusual purpose. Without being asked, he quietly closed the curtain around his mother's bed and turned to his father. "Hide under the bed right now," he whispered urgently. Confused but trusting his son's instincts, Julius followed Roman's lead. They crouched together in the narrow space beneath the hospital bed, Roman's small hand gripping his father's tightly. Moments later, footsteps approached from the hallway. Multiple sets, moving with deliberate stealth. Julius heard the door open softly, then Brandon Calhoun's voice, low and tense. "Is she awake?" "Still sedated," came Dr. Miranda's reply. "But we don't have much time. Julius has been asking questions. I can't keep deflecting." "Did you call Paige?" This was a woman's voice Julius didn't recognize. "She's handling things at home," Brandon answered, "making sure there's no evidence of our communications. Once Candace recovers enough to travel, we can proceed with the plan we discussed." Under the bed, Julius felt his blood turn to ice as he listened to them discuss logistics for Candace's disappearance with the baby. They planned not just to divorce him, but to vanish entirely, taking Roman through a custody battle while destroying Julius financially through false domestic abuse allegations. "What about the kid?" the unknown woman asked. "Roman stays here," Brandon said dismissively. "He's Julius's problem. We only need Candace and the baby." Roman's grip on his father's hand tightened, and Julius saw in his son's eyes the same cold fury that ran through little family blood. They just heard themselves dismissed as disposable obstacles to Brandon and Candace's new life. The conversation continued for several more minutes, covering details about fake identification documents, offshore accounts, and a planned route through Canada to a new life in Europe. Julius memorized every word while calculating the modifications his plan would require. Finally, the conspirators left, but not before Brandon placed a burner phone beside Candace's bed and instructed Dr. Miranda to ensure she received it upon waking. The door closed, and after waiting several minutes, Julius and Roman emerged from their hiding place. "Dad," Roman whispered, his young voice carrying a cold certainty that would have been disturbing in any other family. "They were going to take me away from you." "I heard, son." "And they call me your problem?" Julius studied his son's face, seeing not trauma, but resolve. Roman had heard himself written off as collateral damage in his mother's escape plan, and the experience had crystallized something fundamental in his character. "What do we do now?" Roman asked. Julius looked down at his wife, still sedated, unaware that her carefully laid plans had been exposed. The baby slept in his bassinet, innocent of the deception that had brought him into the world. Dr. Miranda had left additional paperwork on the bedside table, documents that would need to be signed for the birth certificate, establishing legal parentage. "Now we make sure justice is served," Julius said quietly. "The kind of justice that ensures some people never hurt anyone again." He pulled out his phone and began making calls. The first was to his lawyer, Wilson Saunders, with instructions to begin immediate proceedings to challenge paternity. The second was to a contact in law enforcement who owed him favors from his days working oil field security. But the third call was the most important. It went to Felix Owens, a man who specialized in solving problems that couldn't be handled through legal channels. Felix had served with Julius's father in Korea and shared the little family's philosophy about consequences and justice. "Felix, it's Julius. I need to discuss a situation that requires your particular expertise. I'll be there in 2 hours." As Julius ended the call, Roman tugged at his sleeve. "Dad, what happens to the baby?" Julius looked at the sleeping infant, Brandon Calhoun's son, the living proof of his wife's betrayal. The child was innocent, but he was also evidence of a crime against the foundation of Julius's family. The baby goes to his real father, Julius said simply. Eventually, Candace stirred in her sleep, and Julius motioned for Roman to remain quiet. Soon she would wake to find her world fundamentally changed. The burner phone would be gone, replaced by evidence of her conspiracy. Dr. Miranda would discover that her medical license was under investigation for ethical violations. And Brandon Calhoun would learn that some men didn't settle for divorce court when their families were destroyed. Julius Little was about to demonstrate why his family had survived and prospered for generations, and why crossing them was a mistake people rarely live to repeat. The hospital room fell silent, except for the steady beeping of medical equipment and the soft breathing of a sleeping woman who had no idea that her judgment day was about to begin. Chapter 4. The Reckoning Begins. Candace woke to find Julius sitting beside her bed, reading a newspaper as if nothing had changed. The baby was gone from his bassinet, and Dr. Miranda was nowhere to be seen. Panic flickered across her face as she struggled to sit up. "Where's the baby?" she asked, her voice hoarse from sleep and sedation. "With his father," Julius replied without looking up from his paper. "Brandon came by while you were sleeping. Had an interesting conversation with Dr. Miranda about falsified medical records." The color drained from Candace's face. "Julius, please let me explain." "No need." He folded the newspaper and finally looked at her, his gray eyes carrying the cold finality of a judge delivering a sentence. "I heard your explanation last night, along with your plans to disappear with my son and your lover's child, along with the domestic abuse allegations you intended to fabricate, along with the financial destruction you had mapped out for our divorce." Candace's breathing grew rapid and shallow. "You couldn't have known. Roman and I were under your bed when you, Brandon, and Dr. Miranda discussed your escape plans. My 6-year-old son heard himself dismissed as Julius's problem by the man you chose over your family." The machine monitoring Candace's heart rate began beeping faster. She reached for the nurse call button, but Julius gently intercepted her hand. "Dr. Miranda won't be responding to calls. She's currently meeting with the state medical board about her role in falsifying pregnancy records and participating in conspiracy to commit fraud. Her career is over, Candace, just like yours." "What do you mean?" Julius stood and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot where Felix Owens was positioning his van. "I mean that every choice has consequences. You chose to betray your family. You chose to lie about your pregnancy. You chose to plan our destruction. Now you get to experience the consequences of those choices. You can't just take the baby. He needs his mother. He needs his father, the real one. Brandon should be receiving him shortly, along with a comprehensive file documenting your affair and conspiracy. I'm sure Paige Calhoun will find the information particularly enlightening." Julius turned back to face his wife, and she saw in his expression something that made her instinctively try to push herself deeper into the hospital bed. This wasn't the man she'd married. This was someone harder, colder, more dangerous. "Julius, please. We can work this out. We can go to counseling. We can't do anything, Candace. There is no we anymore. You ended that when you decided Brandon Calhoun's child was more important than the family you destroyed to create him." The door opened, and Roman entered carrying a small suitcase. His expression was unnaturally composed for a 6-year-old who'd just learned his mother had planned to abandon his father and steal him away. "Hi, Mom," he said quietly. "Dad thought you might want some of your things for the trip you're taking." "What trip?" Candace's voice was barely a whisper. Roman opened the suitcase, revealing not clothes, but photographs, documents, and recordings. Julius's evidence file, meticulously organized and devastating in its completeness. "The trip where you explained to everyone who matters why you chose to destroy our family," Julius said. "Starting with your parents." Candace's face went white. "You wouldn't tell Tommy and Lucia." "I already have. They're flying in from San Francisco this afternoon. They're very interested in learning why their daughter chose to humiliate her family and abandon her son." Julius pulled a chair close to Candace's bed and sat down, his voice taking on the same tone he used when negotiating business deals that would determine other people's livelihoods. Here's what's going to happen, Candace. You're going to sign paternity documents establishing that Brandon Calhoun is the father of the child you just delivered. You're going to sign custody papers giving me full custody of Roman. You're going to sign a postnuptial agreement transferring all marital assets to me in exchange for not pursuing criminal charges for fraud. You can't make me. I can and I will. Because the alternative is much worse for everyone involved. Brandon Calhoun doesn't know yet that his wife Paige is currently receiving copies of every text message, every photo, every hotel receipt, and every plan you two made together. He doesn't know that his business licenses are under review for connections to fraudulent activities. He doesn't know that the IRS has been provided with information about the offshore accounts he's been hiding. Julius leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried more menace than any shout. But mostly, he doesn't know that some people don't settle family disputes through lawyers and divorce courts. Some people handle betrayal the way my family has handled it for generations. What are you saying? Roman, still standing by the window, spoke up in his clear, young voice. Dad saying that bad people who hurt families don't get to just walk away and start over. They get stopped. The coldness in his son's words sent a chill through Julius, not because he disapproved, but because he recognized the birth of something that would serve Roman well in a world where weakness invited victimization. Candace, Julius continued, you have one opportunity to minimize the damage you've caused. Sign the papers, accept the consequences of your choices, and disappear from our lives. In exchange, Brandon gets to live long enough to regret his part in this. You're threatening to kill him? I'm explaining that some betrayals carry consequences that go beyond financial settlements and custody arrangements. Brandon touched my wife, planned to steal my son, and conspired to destroy my life. In some parts of the world, in some families, that carries a death sentence. Julius stood and moved toward the door. You have 2 hours to decide, Candace. Sign the papers and accept exile, or force me to solve this problem using methods that won't leave you any choices at all. What about the baby? You can't just. The baby goes to his father, who's about to learn what it feels like to have his world destroyed by consequences he never saw coming. After that, nature will take its course. As Julius reached for the door handle, Candace called out desperately, and if I sign everything? If I do what you want? Julius paused without turning around. Then you get to live with the knowledge that you destroyed your family for a man who's about to discover that betraying Julius Little was the last mistake he'll ever make. The door closed behind father and son, leaving Candace alone with the documents that would seal her fate and the growing understanding that she'd underestimated the man she'd chosen to betray. Outside, Felix Owens waited with tools and expertise that would ensure Brandon Calhoun's lesson and consequences would be both thorough and permanent. The reckoning had begun, and Julius Little was just getting started. Chapter 5. The Trap Springs. Felix Owens studied the photographs Julius had spread across the workshop table. At 62, Felix moved with the careful economy of a man who'd spent decades making problems disappear. His scarred hands traced the images of Brandon Calhoun's daily routines. His morning jog through the hills behind his house, his lunch meetings at the Timber Creek Cafe, his evening visits to a private gym outside town. Clean habits, Felix observed. Predictable schedule. The kind of man who thinks success makes him untouchable. He's about to learn otherwise, Julius replied, watching Roman organize surveillance equipment with the methodical precision of a much older person. What's our timeline? Candace signed the papers this morning. Brandon's wife Paige received her care package an hour ago. Photos, bank records, text messages, hotel receipts. She threw him out before noon. He's currently at the Riverside Motel, room 237, drinking himself into self-pity. Julius nodded. Brandon's world was collapsing according to plan, but that was only the beginning. The man who destroyed his family needed to understand the full weight of consequences before those consequences became final. Roman, Julius called to his son. What did you learn at school today? Tommy Thompson asked why Mom wasn't at the parent conference yesterday. Roman replied, without looking up from the electronic equipment he was sorting. I told him she was sick and might be sick for a very long time. Good boy. Felix raised an eyebrow at the exchange. In most families, such a conversation would be deeply disturbing. In the little family, it was simply practical preparation for a world where loyalty was earned and betrayal was punished. The child understands what we're doing, Felix asked quietly. Roman understands that family means something, Julius corrected. He understands that when people hurt your family, you hurt them back. He's seen his mother choose another man over us, and he's seen that man dismiss him as disposable. Roman's learning lessons about consequences that will serve him well. The workshop phone rang. Julius answered to find Wilson Saunders, his lawyer, with an update on the legal proceedings. Paternity tests confirmed what we already knew, Wilson reported. Brandon Calhoun is the biological father. Candace's parental rights have been terminated per the agreement she signed. Full custody of Roman goes to you, and all marital assets transfer according to the post-nuptial agreement. And the other matters? Brandon's business licenses are suspended pending investigation into fraudulent practices. The IRS has frozen his accounts. Dr. Miranda's medical license has been revoked. Everything's proceeding as you requested. Julius ended the call and turned back to Felix. Brandon's been neutralized financially and professionally. Now we move to the final phase. Felix opened a black case containing items that most people would never recognize. Specialized restraints, chemical compounds, and precision instruments designed for very specific purposes. You understand there's no going back from this point? Brandon Calhoun made his choice when he decided to destroy my family. Now, he gets to live with the consequences of that choice. Briefly, Roman looked up from his equipment. Dad, can I ask something? Always, son. Will Mom try to come back? After? Julius considered the question seriously. Candace was currently staying with her parents, who'd been horrified to learn of her betrayal and the circumstances surrounding the baby's birth. Tommy and Lucia Chung had raised their daughter with traditional values about family loyalty and honor, and her actions had shamed them deeply. Your mother made her choice, Roman. She chose Brandon over us. Lies over truth, destruction over family. People don't come back from choices like that. Good, Roman said simply. She hurt you. She hurt our family. People who do that shouldn't get to come back. Felix studied the boy with professional interest. You're raising a soldier, Julius. I'm raising a little. We protect what's ours, and we punish those who threaten it. Roman's learning early what took me years to understand. That evening, Julius drove to the Riverside Motel to deliver Brandon's invitation to their final meeting. He found the man exactly where Felix had predicted, drunk, disheveled, and wallowing in the ruins of his life. Brandon's room reeked of whiskey and desperation. Julius, Brandon slurred when he opened the door. Come to gloat. Come to offer you a chance to explain yourself before we settle this permanently. Brandon's bloodshot eyes struggled to focus. What do you mean, settle this? I mean, you destroyed my family, Brandon. You seduced my wife, fathered a child while she was married to me, and planned to steal my son. Those actions have consequences. Look, Julius, I know you're angry. Angry. Julius stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. Brandon, angry is what men feel when someone cuts them off in traffic. What I feel about what you've done to my family requires a different word entirely. Brandon stumbled backward, suddenly aware that he was in the presence of something dangerous. What do you want? Money? I'll pay whatever. I want you to understand something about the little family. We don't forgive betrayal, Brandon. We don't forget it. We don't settle it through lawyers or divorce courts. We handle it personally. Julius pulled out his phone and showed Brandon a photograph. Felix Owens loading equipment into his van outside the motel. You're going to come with me tonight, Brandon. You're going to explain to my son why you thought it was acceptable to destroy his family. You're going to apologize for the pain you've caused. And then you're going to face the consequences of your actions. You can't just. I can and I will. Because some betrayals demand more than legal punishment. Some betrayals require justice that the courts are too civilized to provide. Brandon's face went white as the full implications of Julius's words sank in. Julius, please. I have children. So do I. You tried to steal mine. Your children will learn that their father was a man who destroyed families for his own gratification. That's the legacy you chose for them. Julius pulled zip ties from his pocket, industrial-grade restraints that had served him well in various business negotiations where standard contracts weren't sufficient. You can come voluntarily, or Felix can come up here and assist you. Either way, you're coming. The only question is how much dignity you retain in the process. Brandon looked around the motel room as if searching for escape routes, but Julius had positioned himself between the door and his target. The window faced a 3-story drop onto concrete. There was nowhere to run. What are you going to do to me? I'm going to teach you what happens to men who think they can destroy Julius Little's family and walk away. It's a lesson you'll only need once, because you won't be around to forget it. 20 minutes later, Brandon Calhoun was secured in the back of Felix's van, heading toward a workshop where justice would be served with the same precision Julius brought to his metalwork. The tools were ready, the soundproofing was adequate, and Roman was waiting to see what happened to people who hurt their family. The trap had closed completely, and Brandon was about to discover that some mistakes carried consequences that lasted exactly as long as the person who made them. Chapter 6: The Price of Betrayal. The workshop had been transformed into something that would have made Julius's grandfather proud. Military precision met industrial capability, creating an environment where justice could be dispensed without interference from neighbors or authorities. Roman sat on a stool near the workbench, his expression calm as Felix and Julius secured Brandon Calhoun to a steel chair that had been welded to the floor specifically for this purpose. Brandon's eyes darted around the space, taking in details that painted a picture of his immediate future: soundproof walls, drain systems in the concrete floor, tools arranged with surgical precision. He was no longer drunk. Terror had burned the alcohol from his system, leaving him with crystal-clear awareness of his situation. "Julius, please," he whispered, testing the restraints that held him. "This is insane. You can't just—" "I can't what, Brandon?" Julius pulled up a chair and sat facing his prisoner. "I can't hold you accountable for destroying my family. I can't make you face consequences for your actions." "According to who?" Felix moved around the edges of the space, checking equipment and preparing instruments with the methodical care of a craftsman about to begin important work. Roman watched everything with the focused attention of a student learning valuable lessons. "Dad," Roman said quietly, "should I ask him about the plans they made? About taking me away from you?" Julius nodded. "Go ahead, son." Brandon should explain his thinking to the person he was planning to hurt. Roman slid off his stool and approached Brandon with the direct simplicity that only children possess. "Why did you want to take me away from my dad?" Brandon stared at the 6-year-old, struggling to comprehend how he'd arrived at a moment where a child was interrogating him about family destruction. We never meant to hurt you, Roman. Your mother and we just fell in love." "That's a lie," Roman interrupted with matter-of-fact certainty. "Love doesn't hurt families. Love protects them. What you and Mom did wasn't love. It was selfishness." The child's words carried a weight that seemed to crush something inside Brandon. He looked from Roman to Julius, seeing in both faces the same cold judgment. "Roman's right," Julius said. "What you and Candace called love was actually just selfishness and lust. You wanted what you wanted, and you didn't care who got hurt. You didn't care about my marriage, my family, or my son's well-being. You just took what you wanted and made plans to take more. You were going to steal my son and use him as leverage in a custody battle while you and my wife started new life with my money," Julius finished. "We heard your conversation at the hospital, Brandon. We know exactly what you were planning." Felix approached with a small device that looked like a cross between a soldering iron and a medical instrument. "Julius, we should begin. Dawn comes early, and we have disposal considerations." Brandon's breathing became rapid and shallow. "Disposal? Jesus Christ, Julius, you can't be serious about this. It's murder. You'll go to prison. Roman will grow up without a father. Roman will grow up knowing that his father protected their family," Julius corrected. "He'll know that when someone threatens what's ours, we respond with decisive action. He'll learn that justice isn't always delivered by courts and lawyers. This isn't justice, it's revenge. The difference, Roman said in his clear young voice, is that justice makes sure bad people can't hurt anyone else. Revenge just makes them sorry. Dad's doing justice. Julius felt a surge of pride at his son's understanding. The boy grasped concepts that most adults struggled with. The difference between punishment and prevention, between legal consequences and effective ones. Brandon, Julius said, you're going to answer some questions before we proceed. First, did you ever consider what your actions would do to Roman? Yes, but wrong answer. Felix's device made a soft humming sound as it approached Brandon's left hand. Try again. Brandon screamed as the instrument made contact with his fingers, the smell of burning flesh filling the workshop. Roman watched without flinching, absorbing lessons about consequences that would shape his character for life. Did you consider what your actions would do to Roman? Julius repeated. No, Brandon gasped. No, I never thought about him. I only thought about Candace and myself. I'm sorry. Better. Second question. When you and Candace planned to disappear with the baby, what did you intend to do about Roman? We were going to fight for custody. We thought. Felix's device moved to Brandon's right hand, producing another scream that the soundproof walls contained perfectly. What did you intend to do about Roman? Use him. We were going to use him to hurt you financially through child support and custody battles. We were going to make you pay for everything while keeping him away from you as much as possible. Julius nodded approvingly. Honesty. Third question. If you had succeeded in your plans, would you have stopped there, or would you have continued destroying lives whenever it suited your purposes? Brandon looked around the workshop desperately, understanding that his answer would determine how much longer this session lasted. I would have stopped. Julius, I swear. Wrong. Julius stood and nodded to Felix. People like you don't stop, Brandon. You would have continued taking what you wanted from whoever was weak enough to let you. You would have raised my wife's child to think that destroying families was acceptable behavior. You would have made Roman believe that his father was a man who could be victimized without consequences. Felix moved to more sensitive areas, and Brandon's screams echoed off the workshop walls. Roman pulled out a small notebook and began writing, documenting the session with the thoroughness of a good student. What are you writing, son? Julius asked during a pause in the proceedings. A list of what we learned about bad people, Roman replied. So I'll remember how to recognize them when I'm older. Julius reviewed his son's notes, impressed by the analytical thinking they demonstrated. Roman was learning to categorize threats, identify patterns of behavior, and understand the relationship between actions and consequences. These were skills that would serve him well in a world where predators often disguise themselves as ordinary people. The session continued for another hour, with Brandon providing detailed confessions about his plans, his motivations, and his complete disregard for the damage he'd intended to cause. Felix's expertise ensured that every answer was truthful and that Brandon's understanding of consequences was thorough and lasting. Finally, Julius called a halt to the educational portion of the evening. Brandon hung in his restraints, barely conscious but fully aware of his situation. Brandon, Julius said, you destroyed my family for your own gratification. You planned to steal my son and my money. You showed no regard for anyone but yourself. Do you understand why those choices require permanent consequences? Brandon could barely whisper his response. Yes. Good. Roman, do you have any final questions for Mr. Calhoun? Roman approached the broken man in the chair, studying him with clinical interest. Did you think my dad would just let you hurt us? I thought he would use lawyers. I thought he would follow the rules. Whose rules? Roman asked. The rules that let bad people hurt families and then escape? Dad doesn't follow those rules. He follows better ones. Roman returned to his stool, satisfied with the answers he'd received. Julius checked his watch, 4:30 a.m. Dawn was still an hour away, providing sufficient time for final disposal before the ranch became active with morning routines. Felix, Julius said, let's finish this. Roman, would you like to participate in the final lesson? Roman slid off his stool and joined his father beside Brandon's chair. Together, The little family demonstrated to Brandon Calhoun exactly what happened to people who thought they could destroy families without consequences. By sunrise, Brandon had learned his final lesson, and Julius had ensured that his son understood the most important truth of their family legacy. Loyalty was sacred, betrayal was unforgivable, and justice was something you delivered personally when the system was too weak to do it for you. The workshop was cleaned and returned to its normal appearance, ready for another day of legitimate metalwork. Brandon Calhoun's remains would never be found, but his disappearance would serve as a lesson to anyone else who might consider targeting the little family. Roman helped his father prepare breakfast, chatting about school projects and upcoming activities as if the night's work had been just another family bonding experience, which in many ways it had been. Chapter 7. The New Order. 3 months after Brandon Calhoun's disappearance, Pine Ridge had settled into a new rhythm. The official story was that Brandon had fled town in shame after his business collapsed and his wife divorced him, leaving behind debts and unanswered questions. The FBI had conducted a perfunctory investigation, but men like Brandon vanished frequently enough that his case joined thousands of others in unsolved files. Julius stood in his workshop, watching Roman practice with the tools and equipment that had served them so well. At 6 years old, his son displayed a natural aptitude for precision work and an understanding of consequences that would have disturbed most parents. For Julius, it was simply evidence that the little family traits were breeding true. "Dad," Roman said, carefully adjusting a clamp on the workbench. Mrs. Baker asked about Mom again today. She wanted to know when she was coming back from her family emergency. "What did you tell her?" "That Mom had to go away to think about the choices she made, and that some choices change everything forever." Julius nodded approvingly. Roman had developed his own way of explaining complex situations that satisfied adult curiosity without revealing family business. The boy was learning diplomacy alongside more direct problem-solving methods. Candace had indeed gone away, taking her newborn son to live with distant relatives in Oregon. The shame of her exposure had driven her from Montana entirely, and the legal documents she'd signed ensured she would never return to claim any part of the life she destroyed. Her parents, Tommy and Lucia Chung, had disowned her completely after learning the full extent of her betrayal. "How do you feel about Mom being gone?" Julius asked, continuing to test his son's emotional development. Roman considered the question with his characteristic seriousness. "I miss who I thought she was, but I don't miss the person who lied to us and wanted to hurt our family." "Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense, son. That's a very mature way to understand the situation." The workshop door opened, and Felix Owens entered carrying a newspaper and wearing an expression of professional satisfaction. At his age, Felix had seen enough family disputes to appreciate when one was resolved thoroughly and permanently. "Thought you'd want to see this," Felix said, handing Julius the paper. The headline read, "Local Contractor's Disappearance Remains Mystery." The article rehashed the official story about Brandon's financial troubles and shame-driven flight, but the accompanying photo showed something more interesting. Paige Calhoun and her children leaving their house with suitcases, moving to start fresh somewhere else. "She's taking the children back east," Felix reported, "selling everything and changing their names. Smart woman. She knows when to recognize a warning and act on it." Julius studied the photograph of Brandon's family fleeing Montana. Paige had received a very clear message about what happened to people who threatened the little family, and she'd chosen wisdom over curiosity. Her children would grow up without knowing exactly how their father had died, but they would learn that some choices carried permanent consequences. "Will they be safe?" Roman asked, reading over his father's shoulder. "As long as they remember the lesson their father's disappearance taught them," Julius replied. "Some families are off limits. Some men don't forgive or forget. Some consequences are final." Felix pulled up a chair and joined them at the workbench. "Any word from Wilson about the legal cleanup?" "All finished," Julius confirmed. "Candace's parental rights are permanently terminated. Brandon's paternity of the child is legally established, but with him officially missing, the state is handling custody issues. Dr. Miranda, is facing criminal charges for medical fraud. Every loose end is tied up. Roman looked up from the metalworking project he'd been practicing. Dad, what happens if someone else tries to hurt our family? The same thing that happened to Brandon, Julius answered simply. The little family protects its own, Roman. Always have, always will. That's a responsibility you'll carry when you're older. I understand. Roman returned to his work, but Julius could see the wheels turning in his son's mind. The boy was already thinking like a little, identifying potential threats, planning responses, understanding that true security came from the willingness to act decisively when threatened. The phone rang, and Julius answered to find an unexpected caller. Margaret Haley, Candace's sister from Denver. The real one, not the fictional sister Candace had used as an alibi. Julius, I'm calling about Candace. Our parents told me what happened, and I wanted to apologize for my sister's behavior. That's kind of you, Margaret, but unnecessary. Candace made her choices. I know, but I wanted you to understand that what she did doesn't represent our family's values. We were raised better than that. Julius appreciated the gesture, but he'd already moved past the need for external validation. Margaret, your sister chose to destroy our family for temporary gratification. She got exactly what her choices earned her. Nothing more, nothing less. What about the baby? Candace won't tell anyone where Brandon is or how to reach him. Brandon's whereabouts are no longer a concern, Julius said carefully. The baby is being cared for appropriately through proper channels. There was a long pause before Margaret spoke again. Julius, there are rumors, people saying Brandon didn't just leave town voluntarily. People say a lot of things, Margaret. Most of them are just gossip and speculation. But if someone hurt him, if something happened to him because of what he did with Candace. Julius's voice took on the cold precision that Roman had learned to recognize as a warning. Margaret, some questions are better left unasked. Some answers are better left unknown. Brandon Calhoun made choices that carry consequences. Anyone else who makes similar choices will discover similar consequences. The call ended with Margaret understanding exactly what kind of family she'd nearly become related to through her sister's marriage. The little family's reputation was spreading, ensuring that future threats would think twice before targeting them. That evening, Julius and Roman sat on the ranch's front porch, watching the sun set over the mountains. Roman had grown noticeably in the months since his mother's betrayal, not just physically, but in confidence and understanding. He carried himself like a young man who knew his worth and understood his heritage. Dad, Roman said, when I grow up, will I be as strong as you? Stronger, son. You're learning lessons at 6 years old that took me much longer to understand. You're seeing how the world really works, not the fairy tale version most children are taught. What's the most important lesson? Julius considered the question carefully. Roman was ready for truth that most adults couldn't handle, but he was still young enough to absorb it completely. The most important lesson is that family is everything, Roman. Not blood, real family. The people who would sacrifice anything to protect you, and who you would sacrifice anything to protect. Everything else is just convenience and temporary arrangement. Roman nodded solemnly, like how Mom wasn't really family anymore when she chose Brandon over us. Exactly. Real family doesn't betray each other. Real family doesn't plan to hurt each other for personal gain. Real family stands together against threats, no matter what form those threats take. As darkness settled over the ranch, Julius felt a deep satisfaction with the lessons his son was learning. Roman would grow up understanding that the world contained predators who disguised themselves as ordinary people, and that true security came from the willingness to identify and eliminate threats before they could cause damage. The little family legacy was secure in hands that would prove even more capable than those that had come before. And anyone foolish enough to test that legacy would discover, as Brandon Calhoun had discovered, that some families played by rules that ensured their enemies didn't get second chances. Chapter 8. The Final Lesson. 2 years had passed since Brandon Calhoun's disappearance, and Roman Little had grown into a boy who understood the world with unsettling clarity. At 8 years old, He moved through life with the confidence of someone who'd seen consequences delivered personally and knew his family's capacity for protecting what mattered. Julius watched his son practice welding in the workshop, noting how Roman's hands remained steady even when working with dangerous equipment. The boy had inherited more than just the little family's gray eyes. He'd absorbed their understanding of precision, patience, and the absolute necessity of finishing what you started. Perfect bead, Julius observed as Roman completed a joint on a practice piece. Your grandfather would be proud of your technique. Thanks, Dad. Felix says I have good instincts for the work. Felix Owens had become a regular presence at the ranch, ostensibly helping with metalworking projects, but actually serving as Roman's teacher in subjects not covered by traditional education. The boy was learning skills that most people never imagined existed. How to read microexpressions, how to identify weaknesses in people and situations, how to plan operations that left no evidence behind. The workshop phone rang, interrupting their session. Julius answered to find Wilson Saunders with news that would require careful handling. Julius, we have a situation. Candace is back in Montana. Julius felt his blood cool to the temperature that Roman had learned to recognize as dangerous. Where? She's staying at the Pineview Motor Lodge outside town. She's alone, no sign of the child. She's been asking around about you and Roman, claiming she wants to see her son. After 2 years of silence. There's more. She's been talking to people about Brandon's disappearance. She seems to think she knows something about what really happened to him. Julius ended the call and turned to find Roman watching him with alert attention. His son had developed the ability to read situations quickly and accurately, a skill that had proven valuable on multiple occasions. Mom's back, Roman said. It wasn't a question. Yes, she wants to see you. Roman's expression didn't change, but Julius saw the subtle shift in posture that indicated his son was processing threat information. Do I have to see her? What do you think? Roman considered the question with the same analytical approach he brought to welding projects. She made her choice when she left us for Brandon. She doesn't get to change her mind now just because things didn't work out the way she planned. Legally, she has no rights. You belong to me completely, and she's signed documents ensuring that can never change. But she might try to cause problems anyway. What kind of problems? Julius studied his son's face, seeing in it the same cold intelligence that had served their family for generations. Roman was ready for truth that would prepare him for whatever came next. The kind of problems that require permanent solutions. Roman nodded thoughtfully, like Brandon required. Similar situation, similar solution. That evening, Julius drove to the Pineview Motor Lodge to assess the situation personally. He found Candace in a lobby, looking older and worn down by 2 years of consequences. She'd aged more than the time would account for, suggesting that exile hadn't been kind to her. Julius, she said, standing as he approached. Thank you for coming. What do you want, Candace? I want to see Roman. I want to explain things to him, to apologize for the mistakes I made. Julius studied his former wife, noting the desperation in her eyes and the careful way she chose her words. She was fishing for information while trying to appear remorseful. Roman doesn't need explanations from someone who planned to steal him from his father. He's learned everything he needs to know about your character. He's my son, too. No, he's not. You signed away any claim to him when you chose Brandon over your family. Roman is a little now, completely and permanently. Candace's facade cracked slightly, revealing the calculation underneath. Julius, I know what happened to Brandon. I know he didn't just disappear voluntarily. Do you? He would never have left without contacting me. He loved me, and he loved our child. Someone made him disappear. Julius felt the cold satisfaction that came with confirming an enemy's intentions. Candace hadn't returned out of maternal love. She'd come back to cause trouble, possibly hoping to leverage suspicions about Brandon's fate into some kind of advantage. Candace, Brandon Calhoun got exactly what his choices earned him. If you're smart, you'll learn from his example instead of trying to follow it. Are you threatening me? I'm explaining reality. You destroyed our family for temporary gratification. You planned to steal my son and my money. You showed no regard for anyone but yourself. Those choices had consequences, and those consequences are permanent. Julius turned to leave, But Candace's next words stopped him cold. I've told people what I suspect about Brandon. If something happens to me, they'll know who to look at first. Julius turned back slowly, his expression carrying the kind of finality that had preceded Brandon's last lesson. Candace, threatening me or my family was the last mistake Brandon ever made. Are you sure you want to repeat his error? The fear in her eyes confirmed that she understood exactly what she was dealing with, but desperation had driven her past the point of wisdom. She was going to force a confrontation, which meant she was going to require the same kind of permanent education that had solved the Brandon problem. I want to see my son, she repeated, but her voice now carried the tremor of someone who knew she was standing on very thin ice. You lost the right to call him that when you chose betrayal over family. Roman understands what kind of person you really are, Candace. He's not interested in seeing you. Julius left her standing in the motel lobby, but he knew this wasn't over. Candace had returned with an agenda that went beyond maternal instincts, and she'd essentially declared war on his family by threatening to cause problems about Brandon's disappearance. Driving home, Julius made mental preparations for another educational session in his workshop. Some people learned from other people's examples. Some people required personal instruction. Candace had just identified herself as the latter type. At the ranch, he found Roman waiting in the workshop, having apparently anticipated what the evening's discussion would require. She's not going away quietly, is she? Roman asked. No, son. She's going to force a confrontation. What do we do? Julius looked at his 8-year-old son, seeing in him not a child who needed protection from harsh realities, but a young partner who understood family loyalty and the price of betrayal. We solve the problem the same way we've always solved problems that threaten our family. Permanently and completely. Roman nodded with the composure of someone who'd learned early that some situations required decisive action. When? Soon. But first, she needs to understand exactly what she's walked into. Some lessons are more effective when the student has time to anticipate them. Julius began making preparations for Candace's final education, knowing that this time Roman would play a more active role in the proceedings. His son was ready to learn the most advanced lessons the little family had to teach about consequences, loyalty, and the price of threatening those you should have protected. The workshop would soon serve its specialized purpose once again, ensuring that the little family legacy remained secure from all threats, internal and external alike. Chapter 9. Blood and Legacy. The trap was set with the same precision Julius brought to all his work. Candace received a message claiming to be from Roman, asking to meet her at the old barn on the outskirts of the little property. The message expressed a young boy's confusion about his mother's return and his desire to understand why she'd left him. Julius and Roman waited in the barn as evening shadows grew long across the Montana landscape. Roman, now 8 years old, sat calmly on a hay bale, checking equipment with the methodical care his father had taught him. The boy had grown into his role as Julius's partner in family protection, understanding that some threats required permanent solutions. Dad, Roman said quietly, why did she come back? She had to know what would happen. Desperation makes people stupid, son. She probably thought enough time had passed that we'd forgotten what she did to our family. We don't forget. No, we don't. That's what separates us from people like your mother and Brandon. They think consequences have expiration dates. We know better. Headlights swept across the barn entrance as Candace's rental car approached. Julius motioned for Roman to take his position behind the equipment they'd prepared, then stepped into the shadows himself. Everything that followed needed to appear to be Candace's choice, right up until the moment choice was no longer an option. Candace entered the barn cautiously, calling out in a voice that tried to project maternal concern. Roman? Honey, are you here? It's Mommy. Roman stepped into the light, and Julius felt a surge of pride at his son's composure. The boy showed no signs of nervousness or emotional conflict, only the cold focus that served the little family so well. Hello, Candace, Roman said, deliberately avoiding the word mother. Roman, oh sweetheart, I've missed you so much. Candace moved toward him, but Roman stepped back, maintaining distance. I got your message. You said you wanted to explain why you left us. I did, honey. I made terrible mistakes, and I want to make things right. I want us to be a family again. Roman tilted his head, studying her with analytical interest. What about Brandon? What about the baby that wasn't Dad's? Candace flinched at the directness of the question. She'd apparently forgotten how perceptive Roman had always been, how little escaped his attention. Those were mistakes, Roman. I was confused and unhappy, and I made bad choices. But I've learned from them. I want to come home. You can't come home, Roman said simply. This isn't your home anymore. You chose Brandon and his baby over Dad and me. That choice meant you weren't family anymore. Roman, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. You lied to us. You planned to steal me from Dad. You wanted to hurt our family for your own benefit. Those aren't mistakes, they're betrayals. Julius watched from the shadows as his son delivered lessons about family loyalty that cut deeper than any physical weapon. Roman had learned to use words as precisely as any tool in the workshop. Where's your father? Candace asked, finally recognizing that this meeting wasn't going as she'd planned. He's here, Roman replied. He's always here when someone threatens our family. Julius stepped into the light, and Candace's face went pale as she realized she'd walked into exactly the kind of trap that had claimed Brandon Calhoun. Hello, Candace. I believe you wanted to discuss Brandon's disappearance. Julius, I just wanted to see Roman. I never meant. You meant to threaten my family with suspicions about Brandon's fate. You meant to use those threats to force your way back into a life you'd already destroyed. You meant to hurt us again, just like you did before. Candace backed toward the barn entrance, but Roman had quietly moved to block her escape route. She was trapped between father and son, with nowhere to run and no one to call for help. Please, she whispered. I'll leave. I'll go back to Oregon and never contact you again. I promise. Your promises aren't worth much, Roman observed. You promised to love and honor Dad when you married him. You promised you'd never hurt our family. You promised the baby was his. Why should we believe you now? Julius pulled restraints from behind a hay bale, the same industrial zip ties that had served him so well with Brandon. Candace, you had 2 years to stay away and leave us alone. Instead, you chose to come back and threaten us. That choice has consequences. You can't do this. People know I'm here. If I disappear, people will assume you left town the same way Brandon did. Julius interrupted. Shame has a way of making people run from their problems. Roman approached Candace with the confidence of someone who'd participated in this process before. Candace, you tried to destroy our family. You planned to steal me from Dad. You came back to hurt us again. Do you understand why those choices require permanent consequences? The conversation that followed lasted nearly an hour, with Candace providing detailed confessions about her motivations, her complete disregard for the damage she'd intended to cause, and her lack of genuine remorse for the betrayal she'd committed. Roman took careful notes, documenting the session with the thoroughness his father had taught him. Felix Owens arrived as planned, bringing specialized equipment and decades of expertise in solving family problems permanently. Roman watched the proceedings with the focused attention of an advanced student, absorbing lessons that would serve him well when he inherited full responsibility for protecting the little family legacy. Dad, Roman said during a brief pause in Candace's education, she really thought she could come back and hurt us without consequences. Some people never learn, son. That's why permanent solutions are sometimes necessary. As dawn approached, Julius and Roman completed the final lesson in family loyalty and the price of betrayal. Candace had learned exactly what happened to people who threatened the little family, joining Brandon in whatever afterlife awaited those who chose selfishness over honor. The barn was cleaned and returned to its normal appearance, ready for legitimate agricultural use. Candace's rental car was disposed of through channels that would leave no trace, and her disappearance would be explained by the same shame and desperation that had supposedly driven Brandon away. Later that morning, Julius and Roman sat at their kitchen table, sharing breakfast and discussing plans for the day. Roman had school, Julius had legitimate business to conduct, and life would continue with the peaceful rhythm that came from having eliminated threats to family security. Dad, Roman said over his cereal. Do you think anyone else would try to hurt our family? Probably, son. The world is full of people who think they can take what isn't theirs and hurt people who can't defend themselves. What happens when they try? Julius smiled, seeing in his 8-year-old son the future guardian of everything the little family had built. They learned the same lessons that Brandon and your mother learned. The little family protects its own, Roman. Always have, always will. Roman nodded with the satisfaction of someone who understood his place in a legacy that stretched back generations and would continue long into the future. He learned that family meant more than blood, that loyalty was earned through actions, and that some betrayals required consequences that courts and lawyers were too civilized to provide. As Julius drove Roman to school that morning, he reflected on the lessons his son had absorbed over the past 2 years. The boy understood concepts that most adults never grasped. The relationship between actions and consequences, the importance of finishing what you started, and the absolute necessity of protecting those who earned your loyalty. Roman would grow up knowing how to identify threats before they could cause damage, how to respond to betrayal with appropriate force, and how to ensure that the little family legacy remained secure for future generations. He would never be the victim that his father had almost become, never trust blindly, never forgive those who prove themselves unworthy of mercy. At the school drop-off, Roman gathered his backpack and homework with the same methodical care he brought to more serious family business. Have a good day at school, son. Thanks, Dad. See you tonight. Julius watched his boy walk into the building, carrying himself with the confidence of someone who knew his worth and understood his heritage. Roman little would face the world with tools and knowledge that would serve him well, no matter what challenges arose. The little family legacy was secure in hands that would prove even more capable than those that had come before. And anyone foolish enough to test that legacy would discover, as Brandon and Candace had discovered, that some families played by rules that ensured their enemies didn't survive to threaten them twice. Justice had been served, family honor had been preserved, and the next generation was prepared to carry forward traditions that had kept the little family strong for generations. In a world full of predators and betrayers, that was the only security that truly mattered. The truck pulled away from the school, carrying Julius' little back to his ranch, his workshop, and his life of building things that lasted, including the character of a son who would never make the mistake of trusting those who hadn't earned it, or forgiving those who chose betrayal over loyalty. Some lessons were worth any price to teach properly, and Julius had ensured that another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen, and I'll see you there.